What happened, man? Busy morning? What is that?
This is volume 3. This is volume 4.
Oh my god, what are you reading this? What is this about and why?
So people started reading this in, I think, 2021 when there was a crackdown on the edtech industry. And somebody discovered that he wrote about the edtech industry in
really?
2014, saying that this is not for people. So as a result, this became a must read for people who try to understand what policy.
And it's been translated to English. Or was it all Chinese?
A bit of first, I think all the bookstores I've been to in China recently, not that there are many of them, carry this at prominent places. There's a whole shelf of books on this and related books.
Yeah.
I mean, and there's like a bookstore for international audience in Shenzhen, which I went to. And they have this book translated in, I don't know, I saw like 6 or 7 versions. There was in Arabic, there was Spanish, Portuguese, French.
Wow. Okay.
I'm not sure whether was it in Japanese? Maybe there was, yeah. But I think, I don't know, that they have like so many different versions.
So how many volumes?
Published in China.
You said there's like 3-4 volumes?
4, I think.
What's the how many have you gone through?
I've not been reading like systematically. I've been glancing through it.
Yeah, I mean that's the best way to read usually for knowledge. That's just too dense.
It takes lots of time to read.
So what exactly have you been up to? Like what's been going on? Like clearly you're reading this book. I don't know if you have any insights from that. And then why are you reading this book? What's going on? What's happening?
I mean, if you follow the Chinese tech stocks, if you follow the Hong Kong stock market, it has actually been recovering for the last 2 or 3 weeks.
Okay.
And lots of people are trying to interpret. I mean, so now is a sensitive period, right? Everyone looks at every piece of data, every piece of speech, every piece of signal, like very carefully. I think people have gone through a phase where they were not sure about policy, to a point where they were very shocked about the policy, to a point that, okay, there are lots of like positive signals, but how should we like really interpret them as positive signals, or should we just wait and see?
Yeah.
Last few days, all the major cities in China have lifted all the restrictions on property purchases, like all these restrictions.
All restrictions? Like what were the
restrictions? You would have restrictions saying that, okay, if you don't have the local household registration, you can't buy certain things.
Okay.
And if you don't, you've already have one property, the second property, you need to you can only take so much leverage from the bank, etc., etc. But quite a few cities have lifted all the restrictions over the last few days.
Why would they do this? What's the implication?
Because the property prices can't sustain. I mean, it has been dropping. Yeah. And there's still lots of unsold inventory of new houses, which I think some people say is healthy, because I mean, we look at Hong Kong, right? An economy that depends too much on property. People do not have security, right? I mean, either all their disposable income either all the income is tied with paying back the mortgages, or either that they are uncertain about, the property prices, and they might need to save for their kids if they grow up and buy property. So people don't spend as much as they should. So yeah, but the thing is that for the last 2 years, the property market has been going down, right? So that has a lot of ripple effects. I mean, all these people who have bought debts of the large property developers, some of them get wiped out. In my hometown, close to Shanghai, there's this huge construction industry, and of course, these are the upstream of property developers, and many of the bosses. I mean, some of them I personally know. Have been owned a lot of money from the property developers, and it goes up in the chain, right? So the property developer can't pay the first degree supplier, the first degree supplier can't pay the second degree supplier, and it's a problem which needs to be solved.
Yeah, we know that at least in the U.S., like new construction homes is a economic indicator, right? Is it a lead indicator or something like that? But I mean, I find it kind of interesting that this is the solution, because I don't know if you have any information on this, but is it more of like the same people who'll be buying properties, or is there really pent up demand that needs these houses, and like it would be a real indicator of actual like economic growth, and will it actually contribute positively more towards like this middle class that's kind of growing?
Is the middle class growing?
That's the. I mean, well, that would be the
Is
that would be the question. That would be the question, I guess. Yeah.
That's a question which I hear a lot, right? Because I mean, every time you see like a positive report about the economy, be it China, be it Southeast Asia, um, the the thing which gets cited the most is that okay, the growth of middle class. Therefore, there are lots of opportunities. Um, and the truth is that there was this rapid urbanization, right? People moving to the cities from rural areas, young people moving from small cities to bigger cities, and the places in small cities get filled by people from countryside. So, but how much is that really? So, and you build all the supplies of houses, of infrastructure and stuff. And of course, I mean, people say that it's foresight, right? Because
Yeah.
you sort of plan things, have the infrastructure, before it becomes necessary.
Mm.
Question is, whether it is self-fulfilling, right? And whether you build infrastructure, then demand will surely come, or whether you build infrastructure because of certain factors that demand will come. But if these certain factors do not exist, the demand will not come.
Yeah.
So, in China, the case is that, okay, you have the high speed railway network, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the wisdom is that you build high speed railway network, and that will facilitate trade, that will facilitate business travel. So that will have a lot of positive effects across the economy. So indeed, it has happened for places like eastern part of China. I mean, Shanghai and Beijing. The route between Shanghai and Beijing is very profitable, but in many parts of like the west of China, you have railways connecting like provincial capitals with subprovincial provincial cities.
Yeah.
And there are just not that many economic activities going on in those provinces compared to the coast.
Yeah.
So, and building infrastructure is more expensive because it's mountainous.
Yeah. I mean, you see how crazy some of those like highways are, and I mean, recently there was like the highway collapse, right? They're building some really interesting things out there. But I don't know. Like, do you think that do you think with all this kind of planned economy, like trying to predict the growth, force the growth, don't you think China will have to open up more? Because either like culturally, because like if you really want trade to happen, you need to kind of facilitate the cultures clashing with each other and all these kind of things. Or do you think that's maybe not necessary? They just care about the business side, and they think it works where they still can remain like insular culturally and still kind of do business in an international level with all these kind of new connections?
What do you mean by sort of insular culturally? What do we see?
It's almost like how a lot of these, like we've talked about this in the past, like a lot of Chinese companies trying to expand, they have to go through this learning process, like understanding what they do in China is not going to work like what they do outside, right? And so, and if you keep connecting people further to your country, it almost feels like there's going to be this very strong force where new ideas are met. It's not going to be controlled in within like the machinery within the Chinese narrative and the bubbles that they know. And so it almost feels like they're going to be forced to be more open in that kind of sense, where ideas that are not necessarily very Chinese are going to be introduced. And like, that's kind of important if you want to keep doing international trade and growing, right? And you can't always plan all that. Is what kind of getting at, I guess.
I think a couple of things, right? I mean, so certain things which would happen spontaneously, certain things that you would have sort of free agents, right? You have the local businessmen or entrepreneurs who try to make things happen, but you need certain infrastructure to be built to be able for them to tap into it. So just to give you an example, like a few years ago, you remember that there was big news that that Shanghai gave Tesla the first, I think, full ownership of a foreign-owned car manufacturer license in China.
Yeah,
I mean, previously, car manufacturers went to China and they had to build joint ventures with local companies. I mean, the thesis was that okay, I give access to our vast market, and in return, you have to sort of work with local partner and make sure that some of the technology stay in the
You
market
gotta open
rather
the
than
IP
sort
up.
of
Yeah.
yes. Um, and the Tesla story is a bit different. So there was lots of debate about why you would allow Tesla to do that. And the conventional wisdom is that okay, let's say Elon Musk as an anti-Trump, anti-Biden, so he'll be a good lobbyist. And I think he went to China like a couple of weeks ago, right? And he met the prime minister, and there was an announcement that his full self driving (FSD)
Yeah.
might get clearance in China. So, but I do think that there's a bigger narrative behind it, right? So, um, if you look at Tesla factory in Shanghai, and if you look at all the sort of EV suppliers which have been building their presence around that vicinity in Shanghai,
Yeah.
and you sort of get a glimpse of, I mean, the government was almost sort of planning for Tesla to be there so that the upstream could get formed very quickly.
Yeah.
And it's something that at that time, the national domestic EV industry could tap into.
Yeah.
And in a way, it's planned.
I see.
In a way, it's planned. I mean, which turned out to be positive outcome. Um, but but I would say that, I mean, sometimes you just the government just need to invest in certain things.
Yeah.
Just need to, like, give some policy treatments. And what it should not do is that to tell people exactly what to do.
Yeah. Correct. So what do you think the nature is then? Like, is that how the policy is going to be kind of unfolding with the right incentives and right policy, where then they allow the people to move to it, and that leads to this kind of natural back and forth of international mixing, where it's like you said, it's kind of like planned in a sense that's like, I think it worked out with the EV strategy, right? Like China's probably producing the number one country in the world producing electronic vehicles, right? So, and then they're exporting them everywhere now. So
Mhm.
I don't know. Do you think that's how it's going to generally unfold, or it's just probably not going to, or is it going to be like some of a different nature? I don't know.
I would think that when government does policy making, so certainly, I mean, they have to look at things for the long term, right? At least 5-10 years, or it's not longer, because lots of the infrastructure stuff takes years to build, right? I mean, even by China's speed, it still takes years, right?
Yeah.
So quite often, I mean, what the government does is making bets, right? Making bets that
Yeah.
this industry will become the future, and by sort of aligning the resources in the country to basically develop in this industry, the whole economy will benefit in the future, and the
Yeah.
country will be more competitive in the future. I mean, China is not the only one doing it. I mean, if you look at most of the East Asian economies, they do
Yeah.
that in a certain way. I mean, like Korea and Japan in the early days, um, and
That's a good point.
Taiwan
Yeah.
afterwards. Yeah, and Singapore. I mean, you look at what they did in the 1990s with semiconductor, what they did in 2000s with biochemical, and what industry are they focusing on now? I think they are focusing a lot on AI at the moment. So so some of these bets pay off, some of these bets do not pay off. Some of these bets initially do not pay off, and they subsequently we make some changes, we make some tweaks to it. It sort of partially gets developed afterwards.
Yeah.
Um, I would say that they take a certain risk, but I would still prefer a government that does something rather than a government which doesn't do anything.
I think that's a good way to think about it. It's kind of like 80s Japan, then like 90s Korea, right? You have very like this kind of tech based manufacturing or tech solutions, right? And then you produce locally, but then you localize when you sell abroad, and then it integrates into the culture. So you actually don't need to probably really mix. And then maybe I'm mixing up my mindset of cultural power versus economic power. These are maybe very distinct things. So, for example, you have very successful companies like Samsung, but then the soft power comes from their media, and they're like really separate kind of things. And they don't, I mean, Korea's already was kind of Americanized by their history. So maybe that's why it exports well. I don't know. I'm not an expert on that area, but for example, Japan culture, it was very niche for a while. It still is more or less niche, I think, culturally, but they still have penetrated in every almost industry around the world in terms of like cars, electronics, all this kind of stuff, right? So it almost seems that maybe China's probably trying to replicate that, but with like the future technologies like EVs. I don't know what else would be up there. AI, I guess, would be up there as well.
Well, AI, I need to get chips, but
Yeah, yeah. I mean, well,
That's
that
this is okay. But I think I mean, it's just pure guessing. I might be entirely wrong, but I guess that the Korea itself is a relatively small market. So
relatively speaking, yeah,
yeah, relatively speaking, like 50 million people, right? So we built a huge culture industry in Korea, and very quickly you reach a saturation point,
yeah,
right? I mean, you need to tap into a bigger market if you want to continue to grow.
yeah.
So if you look at Japan, Japan is a much bigger market. I mean, like 120 million people is still relatively much bigger. And if you look at, I mean, Hong Kong in the past, like 7 million people, they developed a good culture market, and
Yeah.
eventually they wanted to export, right? I mean, now if you look at all the Hong Kong directors and actors, they all sort of produce and act in Mandarin language movies and TV series. So they
Yeah,
tap into the
bigger market,
inland.
which is China. They had no choice, I think. They couldn't do like
Yeah,
Hong Kong mainstream to Western, like English speaking. That wouldn't work, right?
I would think that if mainland China is not right next door, they might have tried.
You know, you're probably right because Korea has successfully pulled
Yeah,
it off. I still think about that a lot. I still
yeah.
don't understand why this soft power wave of Korea K-pop and K-dramas like kind of just like worked really well. I mean, I guess maybe a lot of it's government support, subsidizing the industry and really purposely crafting it eventually over time. But like, I think the important thing is like you have to do this for many decades. Like, I still remember growing up in the '90s, going to my friend's house, like who are Korean Americans, and their parents had just tons of VHSs, wall to wall of just dramas all
Yes,
around the
yes, yes.
house. Yeah, I remember when I was
Yeah.
studying in London, right? I went to this, like, quote unquote Korean supermarket, had a illegal bibimbap. And you go in the basement and they serve you bibimbap. The whole walls are just VHSs of Korean drama. So I guess, like, you just have to, these industries take a long time to like build, and I guess there has to be some form of government support, and you have to make them kind of globally, appeal.
Yeah,
So yeah, so I
yeah.
mean, it's very
So
separate to what China's doing. I guess I don't know if China can actually export their culture and sinicize with economic power. I'm not sure if that's possible because it's very different nature.
I think it's hard for the very reason that you have a huge domestic market. So 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 coming back to of the whole narrative of Chinese tech companies, whatever, expanding, right? I mean, um, in terms of selling goods, I think China. I mean, in terms of manufacturing and selling goods, I think China has been
Top,
very good at doing it. Right? I
yeah,
don't think any country is able to replicate
that's
that
a
at
monopoly.
that scale.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it just wouldn't happen, right? But in terms of the software things, there's one caveat, which is, I mean, you just have to deal with the large domestic market, and whoever who's super talented, um, it probably makes more sense for that person to basically compete in the domestic market rather than international
it's a good
markets.
point. They don't need to. It's so big in themselves. As long as China
Yeah.
can keep growing in itself, they don't need to worry about that. I guess you're right. Um,
So whether that's a positive thing or a negative thing, I mean, the Chinese government wants to tell the story well, and they have been terrible at doing that.
yeah, yeah.
And,
Well,
and personally, I don't think like Confucius Institute is a good name. I mean, it resonates with ordinary people.
yeah, yeah,
I mean, but they are not the type who will send like current pop stars to try to conquer the world
yeah.
culturally, right? I
That
mean,
no,
even
exactly.
in China, they're trying to contain that.
Well, then, how do you think about this? Like with all the tech, social media, like everything that we consume in terms of globalization, right? It's very much driven by the algorithms on these platforms, right? TikTok algorithm,
Mm.
YouTube algorithm, and that's kind of flattening culture, don't you think? So I don't know. I mean, this is kind of like a tangential, but like going on a tangent, but like I don't know. It feels that a lot of taste, even though we have like very different cultures, like China versus the West, that they
Mm.
converge along these platforms. Like everyone does the same dances, they listen to the same music, and it
Mm.
makes it less interesting because you're not as diverse. Like you don't have these kind of barriers where unique cultures can form anymore. Like everyone kind of consumes the same stuff, at least on a mass level. Do you ever think about that, or
At some point, I would look at we look at Southeast Asia, right? Because it's a very good example of a region with so many diverse languages and different cultures, and when it's like Southeast Asia, that you find something interesting. I mean, in countries like so we discussed about many ways to dissect Southeast Asia into like two parts, right?
yeah,
One way to do it is Okay, one would obviously look at the economic development, right? I mean, which countries are merely coming above Thailand, Malaysia, and Singapore? Which countries are still emerging, like Philippines, Vietnam,
Yeah.
and Indonesia? And there's another dimension you can use, which looks at which which country has a strong barrier for foreign culture to penetrate through, and which country has a smaller barrier. I mean,
Mm.
a country with a smaller barrier would be Singapore, Malaysia, and the Philippines, where all the elite speak English.
Well,
Thailand,
the
Vietnam,
the elites across
the
Southeast Asia all speak
Indonesia.
English, no? You could live in a bubble in
Uh,
any Southeast Asian country and
like,
get away with only
like,
speaking
like,
English.
yeah, if you draw a pyramid, like,
Okay.
yeah, I mean,
Like there's
Singapore,
bigger.
Malaysia, and yeah, it's just, but basically everybody who's educated speaks English.
Oh, okay. I see your point. Yeah.
Maybe elite is not right way to put it, right? I mean, if you look at Thailand, Thailand, you can still have business figures, very senior government
Okay.
officials who don't speak
I
English.
see your
right?
point.
In
Yeah.
Vietnam,
That's true.
and Indonesia is the same, right? Sometimes you have people who don't really speak English.
That's true. Actually, yeah. Like,
That's
say if you're a billionaire, you don't have to. Well, I don't know. I feel like they would all speak some form of English, but yeah. But I get your point. Like, if you look at all the numbers, then yeah, like certain countries will have higher. But that's just again just ties back to like the histories and then colonialism, right? And like who conquered who and what base you have.
Yeah, and when we look at those countries, I think a few years ago we did a research about what kind of TV dramas people watch, uh, uh, and then that was again interesting. Like in most countries, you will have 2 or 3 top dramas which are Korean, with the exception of Thailand. In Thailand, the top dramas are all, I think, I think all of them are locally produced,
Well,
domestically
this
produced.
is what we talked about, like with Hong Kong and the history of their cinema. They have a very rich culture. They've been doing it for many decades, or like long, like I don't know, probably more close to half a century or more, even approaching a century, right?
Yeah,
All of these
basically
countries, they've been doing it for a while.
yeah, they have re-established industry which serves domestic audience
Correct. Yeah.
for decades.
Yeah. Now, well, I've been thinking about
And
that. Sorry, go ahead.
this kind of stuff takes time to build, and this kind of ecosystem takes time to build. And sometimes you need a bit of like, policy sort of support from the government, so that certain parts of the economy would actually build infrastructure
I see. Yeah.
with no short-term returns.
I agree with you. It's like the tourism with Thailand. Like there's that story that's going around social media that the government like they actually paid their citizens to go abroad to open up Thai restaurants. That's why Thai food became like this big category. And then that in turn helps people wanting to go to Thailand versus any other Southeast Asian country, right?
Oh, talking about that, there's this a small county in Fujian province. It's not rich county. It's not coastal Fujian. It's like inland Fujian called Shaxian. And every single town you go to in China, you have at least one Shaxian restaurant.
Interesting.
Like every place. So the funny thing is that when we look at, in the past, the government of that county is saying that, okay, our county is poor and we don't have any, like, there's no reason for like investors to come to our place to build sort of industry and stuff. But we are very proud of our culinary history. So and the government facilitated the opening of lots of like culinary schools. They systematically train cooks and who of the local cuisine, and then they will sponsor them to actually open like stores in different places. And now you go across China, you have like restaurants from this very, very tiny place.
Interesting.
In Fujian.
One thing I've been looking at is like, I realized that every country kind of has like these local, like very localized TV shows, like the very low budget kind. But for the markets, they have very big audience. Well, like relatively big audiences, like in the millions, right? People actually consume like the very local content of these kind of local dramas. Speaking of that, then, like, what do you think of Singapore? And I mean, I don't want to get you in trouble, but culturally speaking, right, Singapore kind of developed very fast, rapidly, and they're kind of, now they have so much wealth, they're trying to look back and cultivate what their culture is. So what do you think about the Singapore culture and being able to probably cultivate that? Because some people would argue, it's a very boring culture or flat culture, or they claim things that are from like Malaysia that their own, that kind of stuff. I mean, it's a shared culture, shared history. It's both peoples, right? So, but I mean, I don't know. What do you think about that for Singapore?
I think I think certainly what has grown well is the national identity, and because when the country was first formed in 1965, and there was no national identity, right? People didn't
Yeah,
identify themselves according to their ethnic background
their
and
race. Yeah,
yeah, their race basically. So what I think I think one thing the government has been doing well is this deliberate effort over the decades to foster a national identity, and this is something that I think all the post-colonial sort of countries, because many of the post-colonial countries, they're not formed because of historical kinship or whatever.
yeah,
They're formed
correct.
because like no, the colonizer draw a line. Oh,
Yeah, correct.
this is this tradition, that
Yeah,
tradition. They became different countries. So so I think that part has been doing well. And in terms of I think inside, you still have a good diversity, right? I mean, you still have
huge amounts of
people who
diversity.
are yes. I constantly get amazed when I meet Singaporeans of really different backgrounds. I went to a good friend's wedding. I know she was half Yemeni,
Mm-hmm.
like half Teochew, half Yemeni,
Oh,
and I
interesting.
went to the wedding. It's like this like huge Yemeni community who showed up,
Oh, yeah,
right? So
interesting.
I mean, of course, I mean, many of them identify ethnically as Malays, but they're fair skinned
Yeah, they have a
and they
line
have
back to
Arab
Yemen.
names. Yes, and they have ancestors in, I think, mostly in the province of Hadramaut in Yemen.
Yeah, that's. I mean, like it's very interesting historically because these are like port cities, like Singapore or the big capitals, or like Penang, Johor, KL, all port cities, and you have like very interesting mixes of people. Like even in people who identify actually as Portuguese, right? And they
Mm,
actually have
mm,
actual Portuguese blood coming back from the time when the Portuguese first came. They still speak Portuguese. Some of them actually just look Indian. Some of them are actually Indian Portuguese, right? So like you get some crazy mixes. And this is just like
mm,
Malaysia, Singapore alone. But like if you go like within Indonesia, we're talking like, or like say even like Kalimantan or Borneo, right? We're talking like hundreds of tribes. We're talking hundreds of dialects, hundreds of like different identities within that. People always, like you said, they fall by the lines of histories of from a colonizer, by a border, or even by a race, which is a silly construct. Like in the U.S. now, like the government is either making an option or they're getting rid of race as part of the census because it's literally a social construct. It's not a scientific construct. If you look at someone's race, they're made up of so many different things historically. You keep going back further, in time, everyone's just going to be African, right? So, I mean, if you believe the science of
yeah,
anthropology, right? So, it's just like a very silly notion that modern day we care so much about race still.
but I when I was in Beijing this time, I had a long lunch with the very famous historian
Yeah.
who spent lots of time actually understanding how things came to be. Mm, and there are lots of interesting things that he has shared with me, and he has been doing that for like a decade, right? I mean, just going around the world, trying to understand the culture, trying to understand how the economy, how everything sort of forged to whatever it is today. And one thing we discussed is it's something which also we sort of vaguely know, but we I mean, probably you and I never sort of thought deeply into that. You saying that, I mean, of course, we'll learn about the sort of the in Europe, right? Previously was the empire construct, but in like 1800s and stuff,
Yeah.
they started to be the nation state construct,
Yeah.
right? And after Second World War, and things became again sort of empire construct, that the U.S. versus the Soviet Union,
Yeah.
and the difference is that now the empires do not technically control all the land; they control through other means.
Yeah.
They forge alliances and stuff, which he said essentially is different form of. I mean, in the past, China had this like tributary system,
Mm-hmm.
which sort of, I mean, you have like a few countries around you don't directly control, but somehow, I mean, they ally to you culturally, they ally to you. And sometimes if you want to have a like joint military campaigns, they will send armies to support you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm. And he said, I mean, afterwards, it was very interesting to compare China and the Soviet Union after the Second World War, because I mean no sorry, after the revolution in Russia, because it overthrew the old empire,
Yeah.
and but you are left with the land conquered by the old empire. with lots of ethnic groups,
Mm.
and what kind of policy you do. I mean, what kind of identity do you forge?
Mm.
And I think the Soviet leaders, the Bolsheviks, believed that they had the right cause for the entire humanity. That's
Yeah.
why that's why the new country was not called Russia. I mean, as was the
Yeah.
previous Russian
Yeah.
Empire, it was Soviet Union. They believed that all the countries in the world will eventually join and the borders will disappear.
Mm.
But of course, I mean, things in reality turned out to be very different
Oh yeah,
from
of
what they had
course.
envisioned.
We still end up
Yeah.
being very tribal. We still need to probably group like national identity. I don't know. I don't know if national like. Do you think that continues national identity? It feels like we're at some very weird flux point in time where I don't know. Like it does. It feels like it's a very kind of old thing to kind of just really believe in your nation state, right? I don't know.
I think I think in Western Europe, it sort of became clear because they had like hundreds of years of that process of
Yeah.
building that identity. In Southeast Asia and in many parts of the post-colonial world, that you had this deliberate effort to build that after Second World War. In places like Eastern Europe, like like uh, Russia and its periphery, in places like China, which I mean, Russia inherited an empire
Yeah.
or part of the, and if you look at modern China, it actually inherited the empire, right? I mean,
Yeah.
most of the lands that China control nowadays
Forged a long
was
time ago.
was historically not China, was
Yeah, correct.
historically different states.
It's very fragmented, but they were united. Yeah.
But they were put together by the Qing Empire,
Yeah.
and 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 China just inherited that. But the question is that afterwards, I mean, what kind of national identity do you try to forge?
That's a very
You
good
shouldn't.
point. Yeah. Because I think you said,
Yeah.
yeah, like Western Europe kind of forged that the earliest. And if you look at now, they have the least, like if you talk about national pride, it's kind of a cringe topic for Europeans. Whereas America's still younger. They still have, well, I guess maybe they do propaganda better in the US. Like national pride's very strong. But I feel like countries who have very strong national identities or they're more homogenous in nature tend to have better economic growth in the short term to medium term, right? Because like if you look at like Malaysia, everything's race based still. You know, it's still very fragmented. Could not get cohesion because maybe there's that. I mean, there is the identity of Malaysian, but people still strongly cling to more of culture and race that they know, right? Whereas like I think if you look at other Southeast Asian countries, if they've figured out national identity, they tend to be growing at a better rate, probably. I guess.
So that historian was saying that, I mean, for a moment it was easier for the US and the Soviet Union because its empire forged not by national identity but forged by ideology or
No.
forged by some vision. And China was a bit different because it inherited the national identity, but you also have huge internal sort of diversity and problems and
Well, they
which
fixed
are
that.
not in technical.
They did the Cultural Revolution,
No.
right?
So whether it was the right thing or not, I mean,
No.
it destroyed lots of things, but it
Yeah.
also streamlined lots of things. So it's hard to argue.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you.
It's hard to put a simplistic
Yeah,
sort of
yeah.
notion that this is or this is evil, right?
That's true.
It's certain things happened. What was the reason that why this is happening, and what are consequences,
Yeah.
and who are the benefactors, and who are the victims.
Yeah, it's more
So
pragmatic
that's
in that
how
kind of
the
sense.
history.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. It's usually when one group was hurt by the other who lost more than they're more vocal about like what's right and wrong, I guess. So, you know, but there's no point living in the past. You know, we kind of look at where we are now, what we can do, and how to move forward, right?
And I think China is a historical notion, right? I mean, you look at the past not to grieve about it.
Yeah.
You look at the past and you look at history so that you don't repeat the same mistakes.
Yeah.
You learn from it.
I think that's what like at least the CCP admits. If I understood correctly about the policy, they do admit the Cultural Revolution probably was like not the best thing. It was like a mistake. They probably acknowledge that, right? And it's like within the line of what they believe. And ideally, they don't want to repeat that. So it's kind of known. It was like the whole big hoo-ha with the three-body problem coming out and how it wasn't like as faithful as to the Chinese version on Netflix, right? So.
All right. What hoo-ha? You mean people complaining about you showing the?
Well, there was a lot of different aspects around that, but one of them was, you know, how could they show, you know, the Cultural Revolution, how brutal it was? Why does the CCP accept that? That was one line. The other line, of course, is like, why do they modify it so much to make it more global, you know, appeal to a global audience? It wasn't as faithful. Like, and there's a few things I remember.
Well, I mean, but that folder lasted for like 4 days,
Yeah,
and it
it
was
was
replaced by
it
other.
was people don't, it's just the algorithm goes brrr, and everyone forgets. Okay, on to the next thing. Who can we cancel next?
Oh, but you know, you know what the latest hoo-ha is?
What?
You know this company called Baidu, the search engine giant in China, which
Yeah, they
used
kind
to
of
be,
died to irrelevancy, right? Like it was a big thing in the early days of early internet for China and e-commerce growth, right? And then kind of never
yeah,
took over.
they, they missed the transition to mobile,
Yeah.
and they made a huge bet in for delivery and lost the ultimate one big time.
That's China for
But
you.
yeah, the core search business is still very profitable. So
Yeah, I'm sure.
it's a very profitable business. And what happened last 2 days is that the company's head of PR wants her department to know how to use short video to communicate directly with the public instead of like paying all these bloggers to write positive reviews about you. So when she tried to do that, she recorded a few videos herself
Mm-hmm.
and posted on Douyin, Chinese version
Yeah.
of TikTok, to showcase. But this video just went viral in a
Oh
very
yeah.
bad way because videos you were saying that, oh, why do you complain about working too hard? I mean, if you don't like working here, you can go to other place. I'll approve your resignation instantly. Oh, you have been traveling with me on business for 50 days. I'm not your mom, so you choose your path yourself.
This sounds like very much like Twitter caution, like, or X caution, right? When people just tweet their mind. It's like some of the smartest people you respect, and they'll just say the craziest batshit crazy stuff because they have no filter, because that's the nature of the medium, right? You just gonna,
Yeah.
like, you probably shouldn't
when
say
we
those things, but this is what happens when the technology intersects with what's on your mind. Then, yeah,
and what is super weird is she's head of PR and she has probably been professionally trained not to say the wrong things.
yeah, but like, people in the corporate machinery and how they advance, it's not always like based on your actual skill set and ability to do the job. It's more like how you play the game well within the machinery, right? To get to that position. So
So and I think my friend's guess is that she probably spends most of the time like managing the PR team rather than doing the PR work
correct.
herself.
Yeah, then actually doing it, right? And so yeah.
And she's a bit detached. And of course, what she sees day in, day out is people complaining about working too hard. And obviously, yeah. So, and what she sees was probably high level metrics and reports, right? Rather than
Correct.
just having to deal with all this
Yeah.
external world here herself. So when she tries to deal with the external world, this is what happens.
Well, she should have probably put her own shorts through her own PR machine so people can vet it and then probably correct her, which she didn't do. But that's like part of
Well,
that technology change and the algorithm of how people consume things, right? So
but you know that way in a corporate machine, if people really don't like their boss, what will they do? They will say whatever the boss wants to do. Very good, very good. Please go ahead and do it.
Yeah. Correct. I mean, yeah, I'm sure there's a name for that effect or something like that. That's exactly what happens. And then, well, that's why things are move a lot slower in the big machines, right? So
what's happening with you lately?
I got COVID again recently, I suspect. So
COVID again?
I think so. So
You're coughing.
yeah, like more than a week ago, I got like very flu-like symptoms. And then my sister-in-law, who was also staying with us, also had the same symptoms. She went back home to the UK, tested. She said she got positive in COVID, but I was testing negative, so I might have been well past the viral load phase because it was like maybe 4 or 5 days later I was testing. So I have a lingering cough. So I got over that recently. I've been doing more thinking of how we should probably shape this format better, right? Because I think ideally we want to probably monetize this over time. So I've been thinking like, we should, I want to continue, like I already told you before, I'm probably going to combine a lot of the formats from EOA into LLB, just make it one format, and then probably start trying to make content that solves problems for like actually within our wheelhouse, right? So how do we solve problems for founders, a VC, startup employees, or like say angels, right? And then I do those interviews, and maybe regular co-hosts can probably start analyzing them, like you and me, Dave, whoever else wants to, can probably actually talk about that kind of content. And then if it relates to broader trends and themes, and then we can tie it to the bigger picture. So at least it's more consistent format in this kind. I'm still playing around with it, but basically it's just like narrowing down how to accrue value and growth and make it something more valuable to an audience. Because usually we just come on and go blah, 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 right? And then we try to think about what, the title or what, what the most interesting part was. But I think if we flip it, we can actually probably become more valuable over time. So I've been thinking about how to do that, narrowing down, then figuring out how I want to systematize that so that it can actually grow more fluidly over time. So I've just been spending a lot of my time doing more of this stuff that I should have been doing years ago, I guess. But it's all a learning process, unlearning, relearning. I think I have a new website for EOA Media coming out. So LLB will be under one of those formats. Old EOA will be under that, which will be, defunct, not running anymore. Everything's going to LLB for the business side. And I'm thinking about doing another general talking format for one of my other businesses that I'm working on. So, and then that website should be coming up in the coming weeks. So, if you go to lowlevelbarbarians.com, it will go to that main page. There was a huge learning process of doing web development again. I've done it so many times in the past, building apps and all these things, but you forget everything and you make so many mistakes again. And from the design process to the engineering process to not, having very clear vision or understanding of what you want to achieve versus how it, translates from design into actual development. Probably not spending enough money to properly develop it. It's just, so it's an interesting experience. I've been doing that.
I use the paid version of ChatGPT. I mean, that can help
I
you
am
actually.
using the paid version of that, but I engaged one of my friend's agency companies, and then by right, I probably should have just paid one designer myself and then found a full stack guy myself in hindsight. But you live and learn, make mistakes again and again. I think I over designed certain aspects, and then I should have just kept it more simple so we could build on top of it later. So then a lot of the design that we did for example, content discovery on the platform, it's not going to be used in the short term because it's just too manual. So, but it's a huge problem within media that all you keep creating content, you end up getting hundreds to thousands of episodes, but then it's never an easy way how to do discovery or search or whatever, so. But that's kind of what I've been doing.
I mean, it takes a skill set. We are potentially moving to a much brighter office sometime in July. And
I remember you talked about it.
I'm thinking of setting up a small studio in that office as well. So whenever you're in Singapore, if you want to do talks, interviews and stuff.
I would love to. Yeah. I mean, especially if we narrow the focus where we talk to the core audience of founders, VCs, or investors, or startup people. I feel like, there's that high concentration in Singapore that can be covered very well. So I'm happy to do that.
And I think talk more to entrepreneurs who are, founders of tech and non-tech companies.
All kinds of entrepreneurs, I think in general will be good.
VCs, I have a high bar. I have a selection criteria, and I know most of the VC, and I have a high bar, and there's a small set of them who I think will share real insights.
Yeah, I think so it depends on how you want to focus, but I think in general, that is the better way for a certain kind of growth. You want the best who give the best, and people want to tune in for that. But also, you can talk to people who are kind of trying to learn to also be a VC, because on the flip side is you can point out everything that's not good. Not in a sense to roast them or say bad things or judge them, but more for a learning perspective. I talked to this guy who's really good, but you're doing something like this that probably could be improved, right? So there's different ways you could approach it too, probably.
Yeah. So what I'm saying more is that people who would come on board and would be more candid. Share the real things.
Yeah, that's a huge problem in the region.
Like 50 layers of filters.
Yeah. I think that's one of the biggest problems in the region is that the VC investor scene still relatively new, say compared to Silicon Valley. You get a lot of imposter syndrome, or you get a lot of people who will naturally have to filter. We know some people in the past who've been on the show who have to filter a lot because they want to maintain relationships and have a certain idea that you're not roasting a friend or someone who might be a potential business person, even though the insights would be more valuable if you were just more honest about certain things, right? So that if that's the case, in theory though, you won't have that many people, do you think, over time, or you just keep talking to the same people?
I think there will be enough people. I'm not sure about Malaysia, but across the region, for you to run one episode,
you have to go across region. You have to go global. I think sounds good.
Keep exploring. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, sort of run a business. I mean, how to find clarity is ongoing process. I mean, it requires lots of thinking, lots of pivot,
Yeah, correct.
lots of
Correct.
execution, and lots of iterations of the execution. So it's
Yeah.
part of the process.
I think the crazier thing with you is that you've been doing this for so long. And I like you said, like we talked about this before, you get the clarity through the momentum by doing stuff. Sometimes you also have to
Yeah,
pause and you have to kind of actually look at what you've done to get better clarity. Otherwise, you keep spinning in circles sometimes. But I think it's crazy
true.
because you've been managing a big team while like various teams from big, very big to small while paying and still building a salary. So that's very impressive from Momentum Works. But yeah, I think if you keep narrowing, I think you're going to keep getting to that very valuable stuff, and then you have a very fantastic business in the future. Probably, you guys are still growing, right? And Momentum Works.
This is wise. Actually, we are growing.
Mm-hmm.
People wise, we're taking an approach. We have become over the years more selective,
That's good.
and you do see that the team actually evolve. And sometimes there are people who you really liked, but somehow they can't fit anymore.
Yeah.
So basically things evolve, and now we take a very different approach from the Rocket days, right? I mean, Rocket
Yeah.
days, you would be, you just I don't know how to describe it, but it would be like, short term. I mean, short term is the superficial part of that, but you focus on certain things and drive your people really hard.
Yeah. Correct.
And for you to build a sustainable business, this approach doesn't work.
It's a different
Right.
game. Absolutely a different.
It's a different game. Yes.
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's it's a good approach, because you're trying to grow value in a different way that's more sustainable. You're trying to solve actual problems, not trying to guess and see if it sticks, right? So, I don't know. I think it's going to be interesting for you guys, and I think you guys are on the right track. So for sure.
I mean, come and visit more often.
Yeah, for sure. Once I settled everything down, and maybe more towards the end of this year, because there was just too much traveling in the past 6 months. I think from being in the U.S., having too many weddings, and all this kind of stuff. So it's part of life. But yeah, I think we're coming to. You got to probably head out soon, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then we'll probably continue this, and I think maybe for the next episode we should probably discuss ahead of time. What would be something that people want to hear about, what problems we could solve for them, for what audience, and then maybe we could go from there.
Okay, yeah, we'll do that. Yeah.
All right, sounds good then.
Cool.
Good chat.
Enjoy.
All right, bye-bye.